During the run to the south, everything seemed to be going the way of the aggressive new High Seas Fleet commander, Admiral Scheer. He had been given permission to trap and overwhelm weaker elements of the Grand Fleet, and with the British ships blowing up in front of his eyes, it looked like this was what he was about to do. But as the fleets turned north, the battle had only just begun. What he didn't know was that the Grand Fleet had learned from naval intelligence on the 30th of May that the High Seas Fleet intended to raid shipping off the south of Norway the next day. They'd left the protection of Scapa Flow to link up with Beatty's battlecruiser fleet coming from the Firth of Forth. Jellicoe believed that his numerical superiority meant he could annihilate the High Seas Fleet in a daylight duel. However, he was also aware that if things went wrong, he could lose the war in an afternoon. The battle began when lookouts from HMS Southampton spotted the advancing German battleships. Commodore Goodenough took his 3 light cruisers to within 13,000 yards of the Germans. The Germans held their fire at first because they thought that anybody that got that close had to be one of their own. On HMS New Zealand, one of the paymasters came up on deck to try and get a breath of fresh air. He was emerged standing in the superstructure near P turret. He stretched and breathed in, then his trousers were ripped away from the immense power of the ship's guns as they opened fire. He disappeared back down below, feeling embarrassed, but one junior officer losing his trousers was the least of the British problems during the run to the south. Petty Officer Francis, standing on the starboard rail of HMS Queen Mary as his ship began to capsize. He jumped into the sea and managed to get 50 yards away before the ship was destroyed in a series of shattering explosions. Suction from the ship tried to pull him down into the depths, but he struggled back to the surface and grabbed hold of a rolled up hammock that was floating nearby. The hammock kept him afloat until he was able to reach a wooden gunnery target that had been floated free. He would be rescued from it by the destroyer HMS Petard, and he was one of only 8 survivors. Admiral Evan Thomas had been having difficulty reading Beatty's signals, and he wasn't used to his follow me style of battle. When his mighty Queen Elizabeth class battleships finally got into range, their 15-inch guns began to create an impression on the Germans. Von der Tann was soon surrounded by columns of water from the impacting shells. The sailors on board could feel the power of the explosions making their ship quiver and vibrate. A 15-inch shell struck her starboard side. It detonated as it was going through her armour, sending steel splinters flying through the ship that ripped through her underwater armour and flooded her with 600 tons of seawater. A 15-inch shell from HMS Barnum hit the Monka. It smashed into her upper coal bunker and detonated, killing 4 stokers and igniting the coal dust. The combined power of the 2 explosions wrecked one of her 5.9-inch guns, killing 12 of the gun crew, as well as badly wounding another man in the munitions chamber. He died a few days later. None of Hipper's battlecruisers had anything that could match the range of the Queen Elizabeth class battleships. All they could do was keep changing their course and speed to try and put all the gunners off. To the small torpedo boats screening them, they would often see the ships disappear beneath clouds of spray from all the shells falling around them. Beatty held his course south for another 5 minutes until he had sighted the main body of the High Seas Fleet to the southeast, as he wanted to confirm what he had been told by Commodore Goodenough. Then, at 4:40, he signalled a turn and began the phase of the battle known as the run to the north. While Beatty was trying to send his signals using flags, Commodore Goodenough was sending out a wireless signal to Admiral Jellicoe to let him know that they were facing the whole of the High Seas Fleet. Jellicoe would have been surprised to hear this, thanks to Captain Jackson's bungling back in London. He thought the High Seas Fleet was still at the Wilhelmshaven, 180 miles away. This was when HMS Southampton's luck ran out. The Germans realised they were, in fact, British ships. SMS Kronprinz opened fire at a range of 18,600 yards. It took 23 seconds for a shell from the German line to reach the Southampton. Columns of spray rose from each impact, about 80 to 100 feet high in the air. They steamed straight through, emerging drowned on the other side as the helmsman tried to chase the splash of the falling shells, in the hope that their opponent would not be able to hit the same spot twice. It was not just the battleships and cruisers that came into action. The destroyers HMS Petard and HMS Oberon set off to mount a torpedo attack. Petard and her group target Seydlitz, with their sisters Nerissa and Termagant going after Von der Tann. One of the German gunnery officers, Alex Lowe, watched the wild melee of torpedo boats racing about between the lines of battlecruisers. Out of this mess, 2 torpedoes raced towards Seydlitz. One missed. The other struck directly below the turret in the bow, and the force of the explosion threw him into the deck above. The explosion had torn a hole 40 feet long and 13 feet wide in Seydlitz's side plating. She took in hundreds of tons of water and started to list to port. It took about a third of her electrical generating power, so the stokers down below worked in darkness as they tried to repair the damage. Some fainted from the heat, which rose to 72 degrees centigrade, but despite all of this, she still managed to maintain her speed and hold her place in the line. Seydlitz's helmsman would remain at his post for 24 long hours. He was a habitual drunk and had lost his good conduct stripes because of it, but nobody would have thought bad if he wanted to top that day. After the battle was over, he would get his good conduct stripes back, as well as becoming the only able seaman in the German fleet to receive the Iron Cross First Class. Seydlitz was not just being attacked with torpedoes, she was also being attacked with 15-inch gunfire, probably from HMS Valiant. Valiant was the only ship that managed to get through the turn to the north without being hit herself. For the second time that day, the mighty Queen Elizabeth-class battleships hadn't been able to read either HMS Tiger's signal or that of HMS Lion. This led to the 5th Battle Squadron steaming 4,000 yards closer to the German guns than they needed to. HMS Malaya, the rear ship in the line, took the worst of it. 2 shells exploded in HMS Malaya's starboard battery, killing 102 men and officers. Smouldering debris fell down the ammunition hoist into the magazine. Petty Officer O'Day and leading seaman Watson jumped in amongst the cartridges to get rid of it, as much of it as they could before any of them could ignite. They would both be awarded the Conspicuous Gallantry Medal for this, but the smell of burnt human flesh remained on the ship for weeks. With shells falling all around her, her captain took the initiative and decided to turn early. He also ordered her smaller guns to fire into the sea around them, throwing up a cloud of spray to cloak his ship's position. The battleships were not the only vessels in action. 12 British destroyers charged out at 35 knots behind Captain Barry Bingham in HMS Nestor. Admiral Hipper was watching the attack develop from Lutzow's bridge. He knew what they were trying to do. He and 2 of the other High Seas Fleet commanders, Ingersoll and Scheer, had once been Sea Cossacks, as the German torpedo boatmen will know. Between his African tours, Scheer had spent 4 years studying torpedo technology, had been a torpedo officer on the light cruiser Sophie. Hipper had spent the best part of 10 years in activities related to torpedo development and training. He sent the light cruiser Rosenberg and 15 destroyers to meet Bingham's flotilla. Rosenberg hoisted the Z pendant. They would not have needed their signalman to translate it for them. They would have already known this was the single German word, Ran. The word Ran simply means attack or have at them, and was frequently used in battle. When the Imperial Navy was in its infancy, many of its officers were drafted from the army, and they brought with them terms such as this. The Germans dashed out at 30 knots to engage the British. The 2 flotillas wove about between the lines of mighty battlecruisers, cutting the sea with their high bowways and funnels gushing with smoke. The British destroyers showed little training methods of their attack. They ran at their prey like a pack of wolves, but then executed their attacks individually. They often got in too close to the German ships before turning to launch their torpedo, and were fired on before they were able to get into action. However, it was the British that drew first blood. The V-27 was hit amidships by one of Petard's torpedoes, which stopped her dead in the water. Petard turned to finish her off with her 4-inch guns, but V-26 swooped in and rescued the crew, and then delivered the coup de grace to the dying German destroyer herself. Bingham in Nestor was leading 2 other destroyers, Nikita and Nomad. The day before he had been playing golf with a friend, but now he was racing towards the towering German battlecruisers at 35 knots. Nomad was hit, her steam pipes were damaged and her boiler was put out of action, but Nestor and Nikita sped on. The ships got within 3,500 yards before releasing their torpedoes. The three sped away towards the Germans, but one on Nikator jammed. It dangled over the side of the destroyer until it was finally managed to get it free and then turned back towards their own lines. Nestor was hit in her boiler room as they had been making their escape. Huge clouds of steam expanded around the ship and her speed died away. Down in the engine room, her stokers tried to repair the damage, but the one thing they really needed down there was the one thing they did not have: time. All of the pipes were overheated from their high-speed run, and they needed to let them cool down before they could work on them. Nikator swung by to try and pick up the survivors, but Bingham waved him on. Next, HMS Petard came to help. Once again, Bingham waved him on, not wanting to see a second destroyer motionless before the massed guns of the High Seas Fleet. Nestor was soon at the centre of a whirlwind of shrieking shells which wrapped the ship in a cloud of smoke and spray. She started to settle at the stern, and Bingham gave his last order as her commander. He told his men to abandon ship. Then he turned to his first lieutenant, Morris J. Bethel, and asked, "Where shall we go?" Lieutenant Bethel answered, "To heaven, I trust, sir," before turning back to attend to a mortally wounded signalman. The survivors scrambled into the one seaworthy motorboat or onto Carly floats, which were quickly filled. Then they sang "God Save the King" as Nestor reared her bows and sank straight downwards. They watched her go, and there was a moment of silence. Then one of the sailors started to lead them in a chorus of Tipperary. Despite their choice of song, they were rescued by a German destroyer after only 15 minutes in the water. The German High Seas Fleet was still steaming straight towards the crippled HMS Nomad, who was lying 2 miles further to the south. They got within 3,000 yards of the crippled destroyer and smashed her to pieces with their secondary armament. Nomad's captain, Paul Whitfield, was seriously wounded in the bombardment, along with another officer and 7 ratings. He survived along with 68 of his crew, who also ended up in a German prisoner of war camp. The surviving destroyers raced back towards the British lines, only for one of them to get shot at by HMS Tiger in a case of mistaken identity. The gallantry of the destroyer flotilla was recognised, with medals going to many of the commanding officers. Paul Whitfield of Nomad, Thompson of Petard, Hodgson of Morsum, Montague Lech of Nerissa, Cuthbert Blake of Termagant, Richard Allison of Moresby, Jack Trovey of Onslaught, Jack Mercator of Nikator would all receive the Distinguished Service Order. Bingham, responsible for the 2 torpedo hits, receives the Victoria Cross after going down with his ship and being feared lost. But for Admiral Hipper, the sands were shifting. Only 4 of his ships were now in fighting order. Lutzow's wireless had been taken out by a shot by Princess Royal, leaving Hipper with only searchlight to communicate with the rest of his squadron. Von der Tann's one functioning turret was next to useless as on the wrong side to engage with the British. But her captain chose to remain in the line to take some of the fire off the rest of the squadron. Macgrath had been hit by a 15-inch shells, as had Deflinger. The battle was fast approaching the greatest clash of dreadnoughts that the world would ever see. But next time I'm going to talk about how 2 of the battle's 4 Victoria Crosses were won. If you'd like to hear about that, then please like and subscribe to let the algorithm know. If not, then thank you for listening for this long.